Dang. They say military children are like dandelions. They can put down roots almost anywhere, and they're impossible to destroy. They adapt easily and can survive nearly anywhere.
Related to military life.
Definitely, I have a memory that's like two parts, twofold, and it's like 6 months apart. It's my dad like going to Iraq. I very vividly remember him leaving at the airport and it being very sad. And then it's like, in my mind, it had felt like maybe a few days, but in reality, it was 6 or 7 months. And I just remember like I was 3 years old and we lived in Georgia. So we went to an airport in Macon to get him. And I just remember like coming home and everyone was so excited. And I was like, I've only been gone a few days. Like, come on, get with it, guys. I was born in Nashville and we lived in Franklin. And at that time, both of my parents were active duty in the Air Force. My dad was actually a reservist at the time, not active duty. But then following that, we moved to Georgia. And around 5 days into living into Georgia, he got called to duty. And that's when he went to Iraq. We didn't have a house yet. Boxes were still there. We had no furniture. And so all of a sudden to me, it was like my dad was just in the Air Force and my mom was like still going into work, but picking me up from school. So it's very normalized. And then while we were in Georgia, my mom got promoted from major to lieutenant colonel. So that was like a really big deal for us. Following that, we went from Warner Robins, Georgia to Tampa, Florida, where both of my parents were still in the military. While in Tampa, my mom got deployed to Qatar for 3 months, and my dad was still a businessman. So it's just me and my dad for a long time. So it was definitely the first experience I had where I could remember it, where my mom was gone, acting as like the complete military person, like the classic deployed soldier. And then my mom came back. So halfway through my 5th grade year, we picked up and moved to Oahu, Honolulu. And we were there for 2.5 years, where my mom got promoted to colonel. And my dad became active duty once again, working for the Air Force. While in Hawaii, my dad retired from the Air Force and then immediately decided he didn't want to be retired and began to work for the Army Corps of Engineers on the other side of the island. Then after living in Hawaii for 2.5 years, we moved back to Georgia, the exact same town where I had went to pre-K and kindergarten. At that time, my parents had gotten divorced. So my dad stayed in Hawaii working for the Army, while my mom was working a new job in Warner Robins. Definitely living in Georgia was my favorite, not because it was the best location. Arguably, it was actually the worst. It was in the middle of Georgia, really small town. But it's the only time I've experienced like coming back to roots or like knowing people. We lived there for 2 years and then shortly moved to Colorado, where my mom got promoted as general, and my dad still lived in Hawaii. Around a year into us living into Colorado, my dad moved from Hawaii to DC to continue working with the Army. And I finished my 3 years of high school in Colorado. And then once I graduated, my mom moved back to DC, where she's still working in the Air Force. And my dad's now retired from working in the Air Force and the Army. Logistically, it was really difficult, especially with my parents getting divorced, because while we lived in Georgia, my dad lived in Hawaii. So I went back to Hawaii every 8 weeks and I ended up like missing a ton of school. Things were hard logistically when people are in different countries at different times. In Hawaii, I had 5 nannies throughout the span of us living there for 2.5 years. So logistically, it's definitely a challenge. There's definitely a few different kinds of like military brats per se. I'd say most military brats are very outgoing and outspoken, but are less prone to talk about their family. Like they'll talk about the Air Force as a whole and the Navy as a whole, but they won't exactly talk about what their parents are doing or the things they've experienced. You hear military brats are the kids that talk about all the great parts and don't talk about the bad parts, for sure. So we definitely have a predominantly Air Force family. Both my parents are in the Air Force, but my mom's dad, my grandfather, was in the Navy. He got drafted in World War II. He's 94. He's still alive, and he was literally in the Battle of Okinawa. And then my dad's dad, he was in the Air Force, and he was an engineer in the Air Force for 30 years. My dad's the youngest of 6 kids, and a couple of his brothers were also in the Air Force. So it's definitely spread out, but mostly in the Air Force. I have a cousin today that's still in the Air Force. So it's definitely a very big influence in my family. I'd definitely say that it's the base for many of the values in my family. But then on the other hand, I was very much encouraged not to go into the military, especially being younger and maybe being a girl. My family, especially me being a really shy kid, they're very apprehensive of me when I was younger, saying, oh, I think I'm considering doing this. Oh, maybe I want to go into the Air Force. It's kind of pushed back, and it was like, appreciate the military that you've been given, but take no more. Women in my family, I think, are more expected to play like a supportive role, especially when it comes to the military. I think there's usually 2 assumptions, and it's for boys and then for girls. You're a boy and your dad's in the Air Force. Oh, so you want to join the Air Force. And then if you're a girl, it's, oh, so do you even know what your parents do? And then here's something that actually I think the record should be straight on. I say it all the time. Oh, my parents are in the military, and people automatically correct that to, your dad's in the Air Force? Your dad's in the military? And I'm, no, my mom is active duty in the Air Force. That's something that is like a well-known story that a lot of other people I think would agree with, because it's always assumed it's the man rather than the woman. I think that might have been actually the initial reason, especially when I was very younger. I didn't really understand what the military was, but I was told, everyone's in it, everyone loves it, and you can't do it. And not even knowing what I was getting into, I was like, oh, yes, I can. I was like, oh, yeah, I think I'm going to join the Air Force now. I definitely decided to go to Tennessee to try and get back to some roots. A lot of my family still lives in Tennessee. Also, my dad went to Tennessee. He was an ROTC cadet in Tennessee as well. So I was really excited about that, to be able to follow into his footsteps. So I came into ROTC at Tennessee knowing a little bit just because my dad had gone there, and then my mom was a teacher at another school. So I knew a little to expect. Being an ROTC definitely made me buy a planner immediately. It's very busy, and there's a lot of things that aren't exactly planned out, and you just have to have like your schedule open to be able to go at like the drop of a hat if you have meetings. So I said, we only have 2 workouts and then 2 classes, so it seems not that bad, but we do have a lot of outside commitments and opportunities that, though are kind of time consuming, are really interesting and really helpful, and things you wouldn't be able to find anywhere else. This might be an unexpected answer, but it's definitely taught me to be less nervous and more confident in myself, because at the very beginning, I hated going to PT, because every morning, they line you up and they ask you these questions, and I'd always know the answers, and I'd still always get yelled at because I'd like look down and stutter them, and they'd be like, what? And finally I'd like, you have to say it back, and you have to know, oh, it's this. And so that's definitely helped me, stand up straight, look someone in the eye, and just get it done for sure. Right now, the freshman class has it's 30% girls, so it's not as horrible as other schools are, but it is really interesting because it's definitely just been established in like the little community of ROTC that sexism is kind of okay. It's mostly everything's just a joke, everything's just kidding, but it's all still very relevant and real, to the point where I don't really hang out with any boys from ROTC, but when I'm talking, I'm very deliberate what I say, very deliberate in that I'm here for this, I'm here to do this, just like you, and I'm not here just to marry an officer in the Air Force. My mom's the first person to say in the Air Force she hasn't experienced any true sexism, and that she's always been found respect, and so it's definitely nice to see in the real Air Force. That's not as much experienced, I think, as it is on college campuses, naturally. I think there's usually 2 assumptions, and it's for boys and then for girls. You're a boy and your dad's in the Air Force. Oh, so you want to join the Air Force. And then if you're a girl, it's, oh, so do you even know what your parents do? And then here's something that actually I think the record should be straight on. I say it all the time. Oh, my parents are in the military, and people automatically correct that to, your dad's in the Air Force? Your dad's in the military? And I'm, no, my mom is active duty in the Air Force. It's always assumed it's the man rather than the woman. It's a really strange feeling. And everyone in my family kind of talks about like getting restless, you're there for a year, and then you're happy you get to stay a second year, and it's really exciting, and you're putting roots down, and then all of a sudden you're kind of looking around like, okay, what's next? What's next? And I've always expected that in my life. I mean, always, when's the next time we're going to move? You know, there are times where we didn't even unpack some of our furniture if we were only living somewhere for a little bit. So now I'm like, all right, I really need to like dig my heels in and like get comfortable, because I'm not going to be moving. I'm not going to be leaving. So it's kind of exciting to look at the opportunity and say, you know, here's 4 years where I know for sure I will be here. Ultimately, I mean, I do want to commission as a second lieutenant in the Air Force. That's goal number one, you know, because that's not guaranteed. That's really difficult to determine. But eventually, you know, I'd like to be in the Air Force and then at some point become a reservist, because I don't want to make the Air Force a career for sure. I don't want to do it for 30 years like both of my parents have. I definitely, you know, want to one day have a family, have kids, things like that. And I'm hoping maybe one day I could have, you know, a law office and be in a city, you know, hopefully like Knoxville or, you know, Franklin, places like that in Tennessee. That's why I wanted to go to Tennessee. And just be able to give my kids like a different kind of life than I had, because I really liked moving, but not a lot of people really enjoy that and thrive off of that. And so I just want to be able to be near my family and, you know, take my kids to go see their grandma, my mom, go hang out with my cousins. I'm really hoping to become an attorney and still have the Air Force, still be in the reserves, still participate, you know, just like my dad, who was called to duty out of nowhere. So that's to be expected. But to have like a life and put down roots and things like that for sure.